Amberlynn Reid has graced us, or cursed us, with yet another digital seance from her Instagram crypt. A Q&A session, while allegedly on her break. We'll take a moment of silence for the concept of consistency which she has murdered in broad daylight. She claims to be stepping back for her mental health, an ever-flexible alibi in her arsenal of deflection, but somehow she still finds the strength to summon herself onto Instagram stories for a passive-aggressive Q&A that no one reputable asked for. Curious, is it not? It's the performance of absence while screaming through the curtain, "Don't forget me!" Let's look at the motive. She needed control. She needed the narrative. Because if she goes more than a week without steering the conversation back to her suffering, she risks what she fears the most: irrelevance. This isn't healing, it's brand maintenance dressed in the tattered robes of her victimhood. The questions are delicate, leading, and laced with misplaced sympathy and the desperate undertone of "You're so strong, Queen." I would wager with cruel confidence that at least half of these were drafted by her own dainty hands. She has the means, she has the motive. Not that she needs them, but she has multiple phones. And frankly, she lacks the shame not to. And what did these answers reveal? Nothing. Not growth, not truth, certainly not accountability. They're riddles wrapped in projection, dipped in denial, and served with her usual garnish of gaslight. She doesn't look better. She looks transparent. And worse, she still believes the veil is intact. Amber, if you happen to watch this, just understand one thing. Your illusion of control is flimsy. The cracks in your carefully curated martyrdom are widening. You're not a wounded dove fluttering from the cruelty of the world. You're the one plucking your own feathers for sympathy. And we're just observing, noting how loudly the house burns while you insist it's just a candle. Before I get into the actual questions, I just want to acknowledge Raglan Bleed. It's as subtle as a sledgehammer, and I love it. The name's a choice, it's loud and grotesque, but it hits exactly where it should, in that soft, squishy centre of Amberlynn's paper-thin ego. She can't copyright satire. She can't suppress parody. And she certainly can't bully every creator into silence just because the mirror is unflattering. Salty Crab is playing this game exactly right. Remove the original to dodge the strike, and then returned stronger, pettier, and perfectly within legal bounds. That's not defeat, that's checkmate. And we all know that Amber is seething. A narcissist's worst nightmare isn't being mocked. It's being mocked publicly, cleverly, and without recourse. Let her spiral, let her flail, and we'll be right here to watch the fall. She's cornered, humiliated, and she can't stop the narrative from slipping through her greasy little fingers. So what does she do? She runs to Instagram, her digital fainting couch, to hold this Q&A where she can pretend to be unbothered while frantically rewriting history in real time. She calls Salty Crab a bully. We all know she's probably the calmest, most even-handed reactor in this entire ecosystem. It's precious. This isn't about bullying. It's about accountability, and Amberlynn treats it like a hate crime. She can't distinguish between someone being cruel and someone being correct. Salty Crab did not insult her, she exposed her. And to a narcissist, exposure is the most violent act imaginable. This Q&A is just damage control disguised as engagement. It's a desperate bid to reframe herself as the victim because she knows she's lost the plot, and more importantly, she's lost her audience. Let her call it bullying. We'll call it archiving. So let's take a look at these questions and answers. Ah, yes, the classic narcissist humility ritual. This isn't modesty. It's bait. She wants you to argue. She wants you to shower her in compliments. She needs the validation because she can feel the tide turning. And this is like her version of CPR. It's the emotional equivalent of leaving the diary open on the table with "I hate myself" written in glitter pen. She doesn't want privacy. She wants praise. And the teary emoji is just the cherry on top of this overcooked sympathy souffle. Cherry. She's not answering questions. She's fishing. She's deep-sea trawling for flattery because the backlash is louder than usual now. The facade is cracking, and the only thing holding it together is this flimsy emoji in a performance of self-deprecation so rehearsed it should win a daytime Emmy. 3 steps ahead? Of what? A collapsing narrative? The truth? A copyright claim she doesn't even understand? She fancies herself as a mastermind, But the only thing she's 3 steps ahead of is accountability. Every time she pulls a string, it tangles. Every time she plants a seed, it withers under the weight of her own contradictions. And yet she still believes she's orchestrating some grand scheme, and the rest of us are just watching her trip over her own Instagram stories in slow motion. That kiss emoji is doing overtime here. It's probably meant to feel superior and sexy, smug if she knew what it meant. Instead, it just reads like a toddler wearing her mother's heels. It's loud, wobbly, and completely unconvincing. She's not 3 steps ahead. She's 3 lies behind and speed-running excuses just to keep up. The money emoji, the most intellectually bankrupt response to a legitimate question. Translation is she has nothing of value to say, so she's implying jealousy, clout-chasing, and bitterness. Because in her mind, there's no reason anyone would speak out unless they wanted a slice of her non-existent empire. It's not rebuttal, it's just deflection dressed in smugness. And ironically, using money as a defense against a hygiene accusation, she's just confirming what we already knew. She doesn't have a counter-argument. She has emojis and ego, and neither are working. And we can't ignore the bigger tell here. The question was about accountability, and she answered with currency. Because for Amberlynn, everything is transactional. Relationships, reputations, and apparently soap. There it is. The self-appointed martyr strikes again, draped in victimhood and clutching selective outrage like pearls at a scandal. This is classic Amberlynn. Weaponize serious issues she's previously downplayed or used as shields, slap on a shiny coat of moral outrage on top, and suddenly she's a wounded dove in a nest of vipers. She's not responding to criticism, she's attempting to morally disarm it. Let's be very clear, no one is making fun of the cancer. They're making fun of Amberlynn. Because the behaviour's manipulative, the actions are aggressive, and the responses are a blend of smug deflection and weaponized fragility. Raglan Bleed is a parody name. It's satirical, exaggerated, and absurd. You know, like Amber's own claim that she's not posting to YouTube. It's not ableism, it's not cruelty, it's a critique through character. If you can't handle that, Amber, then you're not 3 steps ahead, you're just 10 tantrums behind. She always tries this, deflect with buzzwords, accuse the critic of being the real monster, and then sit atop her throne made of teary emojis and moral high ground that she hasn't even earned. Delusional? She's not just swimming in the river of denial. She's built a vacation home on the banks. The art of technicalities. She thinks she's being clever. She thinks this semantic tap dance makes her look unbothered. In reality, it's just another case of Amberlynn's law. When caught contradicting herself, simply move the goalpost and pretend the original statement never existed. She didn't take a break. She took a pivot. She didn't disappear. She rebranded her presence. She's been lurking, commenting, baiting reactors, throwing out sympathy posts, threatening people, and holding Instagram court sessions where she's both judge and victim. But taking a break from what? Responsibility, the truth, losing control of the narrative? Because if this is what a break looks like, I can't even imagine her version of being active. When the criticism gets too sharp, too accurate, and too abundant, don't walk, but run to the delusional enablers in the back row. Of course she'd love a Vegas Lynn moment, because nothing says I'm totally fine and not spiraling at all like fantasizing about a girls' trip while dodging accountability and threatening creators behind the scenes. What better way to ignore the backlash than with a fantasy soaked in slot machines and surface-level flattery? But here's the twist. No matter how far you fly, girl, you're still the problem in your own suitcase. Vegas isn't going to save you from receipts. Does she regret starting YouTube? Of course not. Why would she? YouTube's the only thing that's ever given Amberlynn control, attention, money, and an endless supply of both enablers and enemies. It's exactly the environment that a narcissist thrives in. She doesn't regret it because it's her ecosystem. It's her playground, her battleground. She doesn't want the peace. She wants an audience. Regret would require attention, reflection, growth, acknowledgement of the damage she's done to others and herself. Instead, she's giving us this flat, smug little nah, like someone who's proud of the chaos she's caused, because at least it keeps her name in people's mouths. She doesn't regret starting YouTube. She regrets that we caught on. And now we arrive at the praise-bait cooldown cycle. The phase where she hand selects the most delusional compliments to pin like little gold stars on her collapsing persona. There's no reflection, no humility, just a soft emoji and a vague nod of acceptance, as if she hasn't spent the last few days antagonizing creators, threatening strikes, and playing the victim in high definition. It's not soulfulness, it's strategic softness. She wants to be perceived as tender, wounded, and gracious, anything but the calculated chaos engine she actually is. This is just performance, it's not personality. A beautiful soul does not send copyright threats to silence criticism. A beautiful soul doesn't bait reactors, then cry ableism when parody strikes back. A beautiful soul doesn't fabricate a break just to lurk in the shadows, dodging questions with emojis. You want to see Amberlynn Reid's real soul? Look at her actions, not her emoji of choice. There's 10 years of evidence saying that her soul is anything but beautiful. And then the philosopher awakens. No, Amber, two things can't be true at once this time. This isn't a metaphysical riddle. This is a direct question about your refusal to own your behaviour, and your response is just a cheap deflection wrapped in fake enlightened vagueness. Two things can be true at once is what people say when they've run out of actual explanations but still want to sound wise. It's the verbal equivalent of shrugging while tossing glitter in the air and hoping no one notices you've not said anything. What she means is, I want to keep discrediting Beck without looking like a monster, so I'll pretend this is some grey area think piece instead of what it really is, me refusing to take accountability. But here's the problem. Accountability and gaslighting cannot coexist. Victimhood and power plays are not parallel truths. Beck speaking up and you dodging the blame are not morally equivalent. If she wanted to tell the truth, she would. Instead, she's just giving us this philosophical fortune cookie and pairs it with a facepalm emoji, because mockery is easier than maturity. Even here, she can't give a straight answer. Rounding up is such a peculiar choice. No one asks for an estimate. They ask for a measurement, not a vibe. But in true Amberlynn fashion, even something as objectively simple as a height is a moment for soft deception and unnecessary fluff. She's 5'2", we know it, she knows it, but she can't help herself. There has to be that little inflation, that tiny edit, just a little polish to the truth. Just enough to feel bigger than she is. And isn't that always the theme? This woman wouldn't give an honest answer to the bathroom scale, let alone a follower. It's just filler fluff, sweet, hollow, and strategically placed between scorched earth deflections and emoji-laced martyrdom. These softball questions, how tall are you, you're so beautiful, come to Vegas, they're not just harmless distractions, they're part of the orchestration. She answers them to pad the Q&A with sugar while burying the bitterness. It's narrative insulation. Make it light, make it soft, make it look like you're just vibing so the damage control doesn't look like damage control. It's not just tea, it's layer cake. Fluff on top, defensiveness in the middle, and delusion at the base. This is just the abuser's chorus. Look what you made me do. This isn't self-awareness. It's not emotional honesty. It's justification. She's not snapping under pressure. She's reacting to accountability like it's an attack. And now she's aligning herself with the idea that any response, no matter how manipulative, evasive, or hostile, is valid because someone pushed her. But here's the truth. People aren't calling her the bad guy because she snapped. They're calling her the bad guy because she lies, gaslights, plays victim, and retaliates with copyright threats against fair criticism. That's not being pushed too far. That's a pattern of behaviour. Amberlynn doesn't snap. She strategizes. And when it fails, she rewrites the script to make herself the tragic anti-hero of her own pity novel. She's not being pushed. She's being exposed. And then we reach the anonymous DM defense, the weakest court in the land where hearsay reigns supreme and every whisper becomes a weapon. Got this DM today. That's not evidence. This is cowardice in quotation marks. She's not showing this to clarify. She's doing it to launder blame. It's not her calling Salty Crab a bully. No, she's just the poor delicate victim receiving the concern. She's merely echoing what a kind stranger told her. A stranger who conveniently mirrors Amber's narrative perfectly. Again, we'll be clear. Raglan Bleed is probably not a reference to her cancer. It's just a parody name. And to twist a parody name into a cancer jab requires intentional misinterpretation. And that's what this is. It's weaponized sensitivity, performative outrage, and she's not even brave enough to say it herself. She's letting someone else's DM do the heavy lifting. Unless she sent that to herself, which she probably did. We also can't pretend that she herself hasn't used her own cancer diagnosis as a shield when her behaviour has been questioned in the past. She waves it like a banner when it's convenient, and then accuses others of cruelty the moment it's not treated like a sacred no-go zone. Flag it to YouTube as bullying, that's not concern, it's coordinated censorship advice. She's openly encouraging her viewers to mass report criticism under false pretenses. And that, Amber, is actual harassment. Of course, the Queen emoji, her symbol of empowerment, sovereignty, and in this case, strategic delusion. She's not standing up for herself. She's weaponizing victimhood and hiding behind a wall of curated DMs, emoji-flavoured clapbacks, and copyright threats. It's not empowerment, it's performance art, and it's not even very good. Amberlynn loves to reframe every act of deflection, gaslighting, and censorship as self-respect. But let's be honest, standing up for yourself implies there was an attack. What's happening here isn't an attack, it's a reckoning. And instead of accountability, she's serving emoji crowns and thank yous to anyone willing to blow smoke up her corseted ego. She's not rising, she's attempting a rebranding, and the audience is expected to play along. She's living for it, of course she is. The idea that her words, her content, might be enshrined forever in someone else's actual educational milestone. It's the narcissist equivalent of receiving a crown, scepter, and parade in her honour. But we can't overlook the irony. For someone who claims to be bullied, mocked, and misunderstood, she certainly relishes the thought of her legacy being canonised in a yearbook. Also, the lol. Always the lol. The signature that says, I'm totally chill about this and not internally vibrating with desperate glee. She wonders what quote it was. Was it something mundane like I'm quirky, or one of her many contradictions wrapped up in pastel fonts? Whatever it was, I assure you, no senior quote will ever age faster. She says she's done things she regrets. Has she? Because for someone allegedly steeped in remorse, she sure spends a remarkable amount of time defending, minimizing, and doubling down on those actions. Saying I have regrets without demonstrating growth is the narcissist's equivalent of wiping their feet on a doormat labelled accountability. She speaks of regret like it's a distant rumour. It's an abstract concept she's vaguely familiar with but never engaged in. There's no ownership, no apology, no attempt to repair, just a hollow sentence tossed out like confetti so she can check the remorse box and move on to her next emoji-fueled pity ploy. If she regrets anything, it's only that people remember what she's done. Her parasocial throne remains warm. She thrives on this. Not the support itself, but the exclusivity. The only YouTuber I watch isn't just a compliment, it's validation. It's confirmation that in at least one viewer's carefully curated bubble, Amberlynn Reid is still the main character. The emoji is just a hollow gesture of gratitude from someone who only truly values support when it's unconditional, uncritical, and strategically useful. If this viewer dared express a dissenting opinion, they'd be labelled as a fake supporter or a hater in disguise. Amber doesn't build communities, she cultivates echo chambers. And then we find out what that senior quote was. It's the infamous, I hope my hate will lower and my love will higher. Kinda cute? Mum, it's grammatically unwell. The quote is the literary equivalent of a sprained ankle, limping, confused, and structurally unsound. But she's parading it here with the pride of someone who believes she's coined a mantra for world peace. It's not kinda cute. It's a quote so spiritually chaotic that it just belongs etched in glitter gel pen in a cheap notebook. But truly, it's also peak Amberlynn, performative depth with no substance. It wants to be wise, but forgets how language works halfway through. Much like her apologies, much like her break, much like her entire online presence. Ah, Fingerlyn, her most cursed creation. A crude little gremlin persona birthed during one of her many tee-hee I'm so quirky phases, where accountability was low but self-indulgent nonsense was high. She's speaking of Fingerlyn like she's lost a childhood friend, not an extension of the same smug, trolling energy she claims to have outgrown. She wants it both ways, as always. She wants to be seen as healing and evolving while still cashing in on the same chaotic characters she created to mock and deflect. But now that she's cornered, she retreats to this mournful tone. I haven't heard from her in a long, long time, as if Fingerlyn packed her bags and disappeared into the woods like all her exes did. And there it is, sarcasm, self-effacement, and deflection all dressed up as fake humility. A triple threat performance by someone who refuses to take responsibility, yet constantly demands sympathy. I'm going to break this one down. Maybe I'm a narcissist, who knows? This isn't vulnerability, it's preemptive sarcasm. It's her way of mocking the question before answering it, so she doesn't actually have to reflect. If she jokes about it, it can't possibly be true, right? 2 professionals have told me I'm not. You've also told us you've been diagnosed with binge eating, then said you haven't. Then you were in therapy and admitted you weren't. Your relationship with professionals is about as stable as your upload schedule. But they could be wrong. A delicious little slice of plausible deniability pie served with a wink. It's not admission, it's insurance. So if people agree with the narcissist label, she gets to say, well, I never denied it. And if they disagree, she can fall back on the mythical 2 professionals as her shield. She's weaponizing uncertainty and thriving in ambiguity, because clear answers would mean clear responsibility. She says this really means a lot to her. Of course it does, because praise without proof is her favourite genre of feedback. Let's be honest, resiliency implies struggle with effort, not just existing through consequence. Amberlynn hasn't stopped trying, because she never actually committed to anything worth completing. She announces, she flounders, and she resets. Over and over. It's just a loop. It's not resilience. And saying she hasn't stopped trying implies she ever even started. She's treated self-improvement like content, not commitment. Her journeys have had more reboots than Spider-Man, and each one ends the same way, with blame, tears, and a new emoji. This kind of comment is fan fiction. It's emotional filler. And of course she gobbles it up like a sympathy truffle because it allows her to feel praised for the illusion of progress, not the reality. There it is. The final act in a pity opera. Emotional absolutism. No nuance, no responsibility, just pain, framed like a Shakespearean tragedy starring her as the noble, misunderstood heroine. The pain is unbearable is meant to silence, not express. It's not vulnerability, it's a shield. She's not opening up to connect. She's using the pain as a trump card, hoping it trumps criticism, trumps contradiction, and trumps truth. But let's be clear. Yes, BPD is painful. Mental illness deserves compassion. But that doesn't grant immunity from consequence. And Amberlynn wields her diagnosis like a deflection spell, invoked only when convenient and discarded when it requires introspection. She uses BPD to justify manipulation, avoidance, and weaponized victimhood, and then demands applause for being resilient under the weight of reactions that she created. If the pain is so unbearable, then maybe stop throwing gasoline onto your own fire. And when in doubt, triple down with escalating victimhood, anatomical horror, and a final finger point at the real villain, the person who made a parody name. Let's dissect this glorious mess. First we get the tone, a condescending smirk of a word, the digital eye roll of someone who thinks they've cornered you with a fact bomb. No one disputed that she was bleeding. What's being pointed out correctly is that Salty Crab never mentioned cancer. The bleeding is something that Amberlynn herself has brought up. It's grotesque, yes, but she made it content. She made it linified. And now she's retroactively rewriting that timeline. Suddenly, any reference to the word bleed is automatically ableist, disgusting, and a moral failing of whoever dared to say it. This isn't trauma, it's narrative hijacking. She's weaponizing hindsight and hoping you won't remember the actual context. Calling Salty Crab disgusting. Amber, what's disgusting is this manipulative bait and switch where you're twisting your own history to shut down fair criticism with guilt. She doesn't want understanding. She wants obedience. A legacy enabler. The relic from a darker time, brushing off red flags like dust from a favourite childhood VHS. Amber's response is giddy gratitude wrapped in emoji tears, as if the only thing more meaningful than eternal devotion is unquestioning eternal devotion. Damn, that's a long time. No, that's a warning sign. You've been here since Destiny? That's nearly a decade of manipulation, deflection, and exploitation, and this viewer's bragging about it like they deserve a loyalty badge. And Amber, of course, drinks it up like vintage wine. Not because she values support, but because she needs proof that someone, anyone, is still under that spell. And let's be honest, if this decade of content hasn't changed your opinion, you're not loyal, you're just willfully blind, and Amber adores that. Look at this. No explanation, no reflection, no insight, just a vague graphic tossed like a smoke bomb, hoping the aesthetic of information will do the heavy lifting that she could never do with words. The irony is the graphic she posted just undermines her entire defense. Let's take a little walk through it, shall we? Worthlessness versus superiority. She swings between both daily. One moment she's weeping into Instagram stories, and the next she's slapping on an emoji kiss declaring herself 3 steps ahead. There's no distinction, just chaotic overlap. The need for attention versus admiration. She doesn't just need eyes on her, she needs validation, applause, and adoration. That is not the hallmark of someone simply struggling with emotional regulation. That is someone who equates visibility with value. Self-destructiveness versus stability of self-image. She implodes, yes, but she also fiercely clings to a curated image. She controls the narrative, deletes dissent, and lashes out when people challenge the version of herself she wants you to believe. That's not just instability, it's a preservation of ego. And then reliance on others versus relationships for personal gain. She cycles through people like props. Friends, exes, audience members alike. Once their utility is gone, so are they. And every tear-filled departure becomes content. She didn't consult a therapist, she didn't cite a source, she didn't offer reflection, nuance, or insight. She Googled a phrase, and it's literally the 4th image result that comes up. She just stuck it on her Instagram story like a child cutting corners on homework, slapped it on her story like it's the Rosetta Stone of her identity. This isn't introspection, it's just Pinterest psychology. Her idea of research is whatever confirms her narrative in under 5 seconds, and she wants it to be taken seriously. She couldn't have done less work if she just submitted the word vibes as her defense. If anything, the lazy sourcing just amplifies the narcissism. She doesn't believe she needs to explain herself, because the image, vaguely relevant and conveniently simplistic, should do it for her. There's no accountability, no effort, just vibes and victimhood. And then we get another classic Amberlynn maneuver. Slap a clinical label on bad behaviour and hope no one notices the intentional cruelty underneath it. What she wants us to believe is, I wasn't manipulating, lashing out, or spiralling for control. I was having a diagnosable moment, and you're ableist if you say otherwise. But here's the catch. A BPD meltdown is raw, it's messy, yes, but it's not strategic. What Amber is doing is lashing out at critics and accusing people of making fun of her health scares, lying about parody being harassment, and threatening copyright claims to silence creators. That's not a meltdown, it's just emotional warfare in an oversized cardigan. You don't get to weaponize mental illness to justify calculated behaviour. She wants the shield of BPD with none of the accountability it requires to manage it. Caught on camera in front of thousands, as if the spectacle somehow makes it more legitimate. No, it just makes it publicly manipulative. I don't think anyone believes that this was a BPD meltdown. We all see it for what it is. It's a narcissist losing control and throwing a hissy fit because everyone's seeing through the image she's tried to curate. You can almost hear the defensiveness rising through the screen. The question wasn't about facts, it's about public healing, about acknowledging harm, rebuilding trust, and starting again. But of course Amberlynn cannot entertain that. In her world, admitting fault, even hypothetically, is an assault on her carefully curated sense of control. So she twists the question into false binary. You want me to admit to lies? No, we want you to acknowledge patterns, repetitive, observable, documented patterns of manipulation, gaslighting, and deflection. Not confess to fantasies, just take responsibility for the things we already know are true. But that would require self-awareness, and for Amberlynn, a clean slate is far too much like starting without the narrative advantage. If she can't control the story, she'd rather keep playing the misunderstood victim than risk being honest. And then she's in her wounded prophet routine. When in doubt, deflect the question, summon an unrelated trauma, and wrap yourself in the warm blanket of selective martyrdom. Let's look at the structure of this response. Step 1. Accuse the asker of bad faith. Instant dismissal, no evidence needed. Step 2. Reference a completely different event to redirect the conversation. Emotional misdirection. And step 3. End with a grand, dramatic vow of never again, as if providing basic proof is some form of martyrdom. She didn't answer the question, she didn't clarify her diagnosis. She just dared you to ask again so she could play the victim harder. This isn't about medical privacy, it's about emotional leverage. Amberlynn has made her diagnosis central to her identity, weaponized it in arguments, invoked it when convenient, and yet now claims it's off limits when questioned. You cannot publicly brand yourself with many diagnoses, use them as shields and justification as content, and then clutch your pearls when someone asks for clarification. It's funny, she's rarely mentioned the cancer experience for a long time. It's been a distant subplot. And now, suddenly as criticism's intensifying and her narcissistic tendencies are being called out, she's leading with it like it's a shield. Remission is wonderful, truly, but the way she weaponizes it is transparent. She's only dusting off this storyline because she needs the moral leverage, when she needs to silence critics, when she needs to invalidate satire. It's a trauma she's commodifying, not something she's reflecting on, educating about, or supporting others through. And now because of a name that Salty Crab pulled out, she's conveniently talking about the bleeding again, and we're being told that any joke involving the word bleed is an attack on her cancer. She's back to remission talk as if now it's at the forefront of her mind. It's just damage control with a medical backdrop. And then she throws in the luxury trauma card, played so effortlessly one might think it was preset in her response bank. This wasn't a jab, it was an innocent question, a simple observation about preferences. But as always, Amberlynn is choosing offence, because offence grants her control of the narrative. Instead of answering like a functioning adult, she pivots to her two favourite tactics. Passive condescension, with I guess everyone's idea of cheap is different, and emotional manipulation, with I grew up with nothing at all. No one asked for your financial origin story. They asked about your fragrance shelf, not your Dickensian childhood. And let's be real, people aren't calling your perfumes cheap because of the price tag. They're calling them cheap because of the chaotic collecting, impulsive overconsumption, and lack of discernment. She hoards scents like she hoards stories, without reflection or reason. But when logic fails, bring out the gaslight and the matches. She doesn't even answer the question. She demands that you forget context and bow to her interpretation, as if language only exists through the lens of Amberlynn's perpetual persecution. Raglan Bleed is clearly a parody name poking fun of her own public history of oversharing her bloody bodily functions and the endless Lynn persona she creates like trauma tokens. It's satire, it's absurd, it's a reaction to her behaviour, not her diagnosis. But Amberlynn's in full narcissistic spin mode, and she wants to twist it into a moral violation, because it's easier to call someone delusional than to admit satire only stings when it's accurate. Are you forgetting that part? She says. No, we're remembering it perfectly. You just don't like that it's public knowledge, and now you want to retroactively reframe it as cruelty. Does she miss Tommy? How delicate, how restrained, how perfectly performed. 2 syllables, 3 dots, and that calculated pause for imagined tears that we never get to see. This isn't grief, it's emotional stagecraft. Another vague, moody clip to stir the enablers and remind everyone that she's still the tragic hero at the centre of it all. Capital letters, the drama of it all. She says it like she's been crying it out in the wilderness, ignored by the masses, clutching her apology notes like scripture. But the reality is she hasn't taken accountability. She's taken content breaks and delivered performative statements saturated with deflection, justification and manipulation, always followed by a swift pivot back to victimhood. This enthusiastic thank you moment isn't gratitude, it's relief. It's relief that someone is finally regurgitating the narrative that she's been desperately trying to push, that saying I regret it while simultaneously blaming everyone else counts as growth. She doesn't want to be heard, she wants to be absolved. And the deflection Olympics continue, and this is Amberlynn going for gold. Raglan Bleed isn't a rumour. True, it's a parody name. It's a joke, a satirical pseudonym, not a rumour, not a diagnosis, not a smear campaign. It's a nickname rooted in her own public content. So congratulations, Amber, you are managing to tell the truth while missing the point. That's funny coming from a community who believes every single rumour about me. This is her standard hand. She doesn't want to address valid criticism, so she lumps everything together as rumours to delegitimize it. It's the classic, if I call everything fake, I never have to admit to anything real. And the crying laughing emoji is just the punctuation mark of a person who's trying way too hard to look unbothered while clearly spiraling in real time. She isn't addressing rumours, she's rebranding consequences as slander. And now we return to the luxury flex interlude, that soothing little detour where she distracts from criticism by rattling off price tags like their personality traits. $235, worth every penny. Of course it was. The scent of self-importance never comes cheap. Let us not forget this is the same woman who moments ago weaponized her impoverished upbringing to guilt someone over the word cheap. And now she's casually bragging about a fragrance like she's curating a museum. It's not about the perfume, it never is. It's about control, presentation, aesthetic armor. She needs you to know that she can afford things. Because if you're distracted by the luxury, you might forget about the total lack of character behind it. So what have we learned from Amberlynn's impromptu Q&A spiral? Far more than she intended, and none of it's flattering. She can't answer a question without reframing it as an attack. Inquiries about diagnosis? Framed as ableism. Criticism is repackaged as bullying. Clarifications are labelled delusional. She's constantly incapable of answering in good faith because accountability is not her end goal. Control is. She uses trauma like a parachute, even mid-descent. Whenever the questions get sharp, out come the cancer references, the BPD claims, and the eternal monologues about growing up poor. She doesn't address her history, she weaponizes it. Not for healing, for immunity. She projects with the force of a dying star. Raglan bleed is a slur, salty crab is disgusting, the community is delusional. Amberlynn, as always, refuses to look inward, so she just scorches everything around her instead. Praise is the only currency she accepts. Any mild compliment is met with emojis, fanfare, and thank you for listening. Any challenge, even polite, is met with sarcasm, shutdowns, and trauma dumping. She's not engaging with an audience. She's curating a gallery of enablers. There's always something to brag about. Even in the midst of an emotional collapse, we get perfume pricing, lifestyle flexing, and a sprinkling of I'm in remission, not to spread awareness, but to regain that sympathy control. It's not a Q&A, it's a brand management exercise in disguise. None of this was transparency, it's performance. A carefully calculated attempt to play every version of herself at once. The victim, the vixen, the survivor, the misunderstood, the queen. But underneath it all we see is the same thing we always do. A woman fleeing reality at top speed while live streaming her own denial. It was a Q&A that revealed nothing except everything. Not transparency, just carefully curated delusion peppered with trauma when convenient and applause seeking at every turn. She might call it conversation, but we should call it performance, and the script is tired. If this was supposed to silence critics, it only amplified the noise. Because when you spend an entire Q&A avoiding mirrors, all that's left is the reflection that the rest of us are holding up.